and it's their intrinsic
nature. It's food basically.
Sound feasible. Sound like
trade. You get the Arabs enslaving many Africans, for hundreds of years. And this was, the doing of Rome. Rome is behind that when you start digging into that whole thing. So a lot of people don't realize how much the Arabs conquered during that time. The caliphates conquered from Spain all the way to Persia and almost everything in between there. They brought down the Sassanid Empire, the Byzantine Empire in Syria. They conquered the Persians, Egypt, Iraq, so many places that they conquered. They were doing the dirty work of Rome. Now, the whole thing with that is it don't matter how much they conquered. The reason why the Arabs got the power that they do have today is because, of course, they are in bed with Rome. But it's not benefiting all of the Arabs. It's benefiting the leaders, and it's benefiting Rome, as we can see. Look over there. You see billionaire, Saudi kings with crazy money. When you start going back, when you look to Persia, this is where you start finding royalty in Persia. You don't hear nothing about no Persian royalty. Arabic or Arab royalty before that time. So that's another thing that happened. Another thing that I think was in this whole deal. You can't find me no Muslim kings or Muslim royalty in BC. They didn't exist. There was no Islam. Then all of a sudden, after this, you get royalty. What makes them royal? Explain that to me. When Africans was already in the Middle East way before Arabs came, and we can prove that. It's already been proven. So who made them royal? And when you understand how things work, you know that it was the popes who was, giving people, making them royal, giving them royal titles of nobility. So this had to be one of the agreed upon deals that the Arabs made with Rome, because who would respect that throne? You got Saudi kings and princes, and they got billions of dollars now. And it's because of this deal that they struck with Rome. And you have to understand, the people, as you can see, are getting duped. They have no clue what's going on. And they think, because they born into this religion, and if you get born into Islam and you stuck in that religion, it's strict. It takes away largely from your experience on this planet, largely. It's just, how it is. It's so much that you cannot do. And if you do, they'll kill you. So, it's so much that the Arabs will never know or never experience because of that religion. And we wasn't put here to be subject to that. So it's weird how the Arabs haven't figured this thing out. When you look at the royal family and how they living so good, diamond encrusted Benzes and gold plated Rolls Royces, and the people living in clay and mud brick huts, starving to death. It's crazy. And they can't seem to figure this stuff out. When you go to these mosques over there, as I pointed this out in the previous video, when you go to any major mosque over there in these Arab countries, next door you find a Catholic church. Hand in hand, you got mosque, you got Catholic church, and they can't figure this stuff out. They see pictures of the Pope kissing the Quran. They can't figure this thing out. How could the Pope kiss the Quran after, the many thousands of Christians who lost their head to an Arab sword? How can he be kissing the Quran? How can he be consorting with these people when they do so much to, the Christians and the Jews? Look at all the wars between, the Muslims and the Christians and the Jews. So many people dying, so much war and destruction, kids being killed. You've seen bodies in the street, but the leaders of these religions walking around, meeting, kissing and hugging and, shaking hands all the time because they don't have to fight in these wars. They're not losing any family members. You are. All of these Muslims, and it's weird how, they haven't put this together. And we know that in a lot of these Arab countries, they don't have access to the internet. And the ones who do have access to the internet are the ones who, on the bad side. So for anybody with a rational brain, and it's no way you can sit back and look at the news and see what's going on and not understand that these people are being used, for an agenda. And this agenda has been set up hundreds of years ago. And a lot of people can't fathom that it was set up, hundreds of years ago, thousands now. They can't fathom this stuff. They can't fathom it. And that's basically the purpose. Islam is created to basically, be the lapdog for the Catholic Church, to be the errand boys, to basically bring about their whole World War III and their New World Order. And that's what we're going to get into in this video. So now, during the whole Arab slave trade, you basically have the Arabs removing the Africans from the Middle East. Now, of course, the Africans was there long before the whole Arab invasion, long before Islam. And, the Africans that are in the Middle East right now, they still getting treated like shit. And they Muslims, they still getting treated like shit. They still not getting treated like they citizens. And they was there long before any Arabs, long before Islam. The same thing is happening in Israel, where they're basically kicking the Ethiopians out, kicking the Africans out of there, and they got this whole anti-African thing going on over there, when African people was there long before any Jews, and that's a proven fact. They should know that. The people don't know it, but the administrations know that. But of course, this is not a coincidence. This is all by design. So now, as I was saying, Rome basically used the Arabs to do their dirty work. So whenever a region, or whenever a place that they was occupying wasn't acting right, they would send in the Arabs. They would send in the Muslims to go in there and basically conquer it. Then you get the Crusades around 1095 AD, and all Rome did was sweep in there and basically act like they was saving everybody from the whole Arab conquest. But really, they was all in cahoots. Basically what the Crusades was what we're seeing now in Syria with America and ISIS. The same shit, same thing. We control ISIS, we are ISIS. It's the same thing that happened back then. The Catholic Church was, the Arabs. They was Islam and still Islam to this day. And they used them to basically gain control of the Middle East and that area during that time. And it's the same thing today, where they basically using ISIS to basically gain control of Syria. It's the same shit. Now, people who follow that time frame, that era, during the whole Crusades, a lot of people believe that the Crusades happened because Rome was trying to get rid of Islam, trying to get rid of the Muslims, and that wasn't the case. The whole thing about the Knights Templar going in there and fighting in the Crusades, it really had nothing to do with the Muslims. They was going there, it was a show. And it was wiping out Christian factions that was basically against the papacy, and there was a lot of them. A lot of people didn't agree with it being the Pope and all these rules and laws that the Pope was instilling, and they were speaking out against the Pope. And it was basically same thing with, as I said, with the whole ISIS thing. We don't like that. They didn't like that Syria is basically going against the dollar and, selling oil that's not being backed by the dollar. So it's like, since you are against us, since, the leader, the president of Syria is against this whole New World Order thing, they went in there acting like they're trying to save people or whatever, or act like they're trying to stop ISIS, and really they're trying to get rid of the administration. It's the same thing back then. They're trying to get rid of these administrations that was against the papacy. So even though they're saying that the Muslims and the Arabs was in these places back then, really, when the Crusades came through, when the Knights Templar came through, they came through there to basically get rid of, the establishment and put somebody in place that would act right. It's the same thing. This stuff, it has been happening for hundreds of years. Now, a lot of people want to know why the Knights Templar was wiped out, even though we know they back now, but it's not the same. Now, as I said, the Knights Templars was not against Islam because members of the Knights Templar was Muslims. So now, that's one of the things that I want people to understand in this video, because we're going to be getting into it later on. Understand that there was Muslims in the Knights Templar. So I want to read from this thing that's talking about the membership, historical fact. Authentically, the original Knights Templar rejected the idea of the Crusades as supposedly being to eliminate Muslims or eradicate Islam. This historical fact is proven by the Temple Rule of 1129 AD, in which the Templar order criticized that the Crusades did not do what it should, that is to defend, but strove to plunder, despoil, and kill. Rule 2. It clearly specified that the only real purpose of temple warfare was to remove from the land enemies of Christ, not to kill Muslims. Rule 14. And the original Latin says only to strike enemies, providing no specific intent to kill. Rule 57. Quite contrary to popularized misconceptions, the Templars fully understood that Muslims were not necessarily enemies, that the real enemies of Christ could be even evildoers pretending to be Christians, and that the enemies of Christ were generally the same as the enemies of Islam. Indeed, evildoers are essentially the enemies of all faith, opposed to the principle of religion itself, and are thus the enemies of God. Therefore, the Templars were never crusaders against Muslims and did not agree with any such philosophy. Rather, the Knights Templar were holy warrior monks fighting for good against evil, regardless of which religion may or may not be involved. The most conclusive evidence that Muslims were in fact accepted in membership in the Templar order was codified in the Temple Rule of 1129 AD, which was expanded by the later hierarchical rules added from circa 1150 to 1250 AD. One key amendment, circa 1200 AD, specifically provides if a brother goes out from the house and enters into another religion, it would do no harm if he returns to rejoin the house, but he will not be held by anything that to that religion, nor to us also, for he has returned from the one and from the other. Rule 630. Now you can see here it says Knights of the Order of Saladin, which was a Muslim Templar. So you have to take away from this and understand you had Muslims in the Knights Templar. The main reason for that, as I said, was because this whole thing was for Rome to basically go and get rid of people who was against this Pope. And since they were using Muslims and using Christians, of course, it didn't matter who was in. And we know like the Knights Templar was kind of like a secret service, was supposed to be a secret service kind of sort of for the Pope. But they was good, as you can read, and this is the reason why they was wiped out, because they wasn't really, I mean, they knew all the dirty stuff. They did all the dirty work, they knew a lot of stuff, and they wasn't really going for exactly what the Pope was trying to do down the road. And yeah, they was wiped out, but you know, they came back and they are today exactly what Rome wanted them to be back then, and we're going to get into that because it has a lot to do with Islam. So now, as I keep saying, Rome basically is using Islam, using the Muslims to do their dirty work. Because think about it, who else would you get? Who else would you use to blame all of this, you know, these terror attacks on? Who else would you use? Can't use the monks, too peaceful. Can't use short, funny Asian people. Can't use skinny people in India. Africa never attacked anybody. You know, who would you use? Can't use Eskimos in Alaska. You got to find a people who is relentless, who travel deep, who can strategically attack places in the Middle East and basically spread the agenda of Rome, but at the same time keep its own people in check. And the Arabs was perfect. It was perfect for the agenda of Rome, which is why they made that deal, plain and simple. So when you look at all of these terror attacks lately, always go back to Islam and always go back to the Muslims because, as I said, they are using them to fulfill their agenda of a one world government. I mean, look at bin Laden, goes back to Islam. You got bin Laden, you got the whole 9/11 thing, and the whole Al-Qaeda. Come on, all goes back to Islam. Goes right back there. Everything, you got Saddam Hussein, still Islam goes back to there. The Iraqi insurgents, this is still Islam. You got ISIS now. You got the false flag terror attacks in America where they're saying that these people, worship ISIS and were somehow trying to be connected with ISIS. All of it is going back to Islam in some way, shape, or form to bring about something that will fit their agenda. And we're seeing that more and more. We know these false flags attacks, they're trying to take away our weapons. You know what's going on over there in Syria because they're trying to get rid of that regime and put somebody in place that will follow orders. It was the same thing with Saddam. You don't act right, they put you out. So we can see, as I keep saying, that Islam is the scapegoat of Rome, the scapegoat of the ruling elite. And if you don't see that now, you will definitely understand it and know it by the end of this video. So now I know Muslims are going to say that just because you have these bad people who claim Islam do some despicable things, that doesn't represent the whole of Islam. And they are correct to say that. But you got to understand that you cannot deny the history of Islam. Just because you accepted it and you take it and you and a bunch of other Muslims, you accept it and you take it in its right context and you try to follow what you think the religion means and you go with it. Just because you've done those things and other people do those things doesn't deny the history of where the religion originated. It doesn't deny it. It just means that you bought into the lie. That's all it means. It means you bought into what you was told and you're following it based upon what you were supposed to be following it. And the people who originated it, the people who are behind it, are using it to further their agenda. And this is why they carry the religion. But you can't see past it because you are stuck with what they wanted you to be stuck with in the first place, and that's believing in the religion.